Hi there, I'm Hayley, founder of Handmade by Hayley, and the designer of the hobby bag, which is what the tutorial is about today. And the hobby bag is available as a download pattern, a paper pattern, and all the accessories that we're talking about, things like the zips and the PVC, and all the elements are available on handmadebyhayley.tv. My website. So the hobby bag, it's a fabulous bag. It was kind of born out of a personal need for a bag that carries everything that I need. And you can see here it's a good size to start with. It's got a couple of pockets on the outside, which on this occasion have been divided. They don't have to be, that's your personal choice. And perfect place for things like your pens and scissors and things like that. On the other side, what we've got is a larger pocket, and this time I decided not to put the divider in there because of course it gives you perfect opportunity for you to put things that are larger, things like your patterns in there. The unique thing about this one is you've got a zip around which you can open up. So again, the larger zips had to have those manufactured especially because I wanted nice colours for them, and it opens up like so. And you'll notice that you've got PVC pockets in here. Some of them are attached using, or open should I say, using zips. Some of them with hook and loop tape. Again, that is personal choice. You design it to how you want your bag to be. So you can see I've got a zipper pocket here, nice large A4 pocket. I've got this internal element here, which we'll come back to in a few moments, but that attaches by hook and loop. And what you can actually do is interchange these. So if you've got different hobbies, different projects that you're working on, then why not change those around? I've packed this solid. If you've got less content within there, you could actually put 2 or 3 of those in there if you wanted to. We'll come back to that in a few moments. Now the base, it's a nice deep base. So in here you can see I've got things like my pressing mat and my applique mat. I have actually had my laptop in here as well. And again, you've got another internal pocket there, which at the moment is upside down. But that one is a hook and loop one, or again, you could just put another zip in there if you wanted to. So you can see it's got good storage within there. Let's move the main bag to one side for a few moments while I tell you about the pocket. Because this has got, well, again, it's up to you. You design it the way that you want. So it's got on one side the hook and loop, which again, that's going to secure your pocket. Means that you can put your fat quarters. I've actually got 21 fat quarters within here, and there's still plenty of room. On the other side, I've got some of my Handmade by Hayley quilting rulers. Obviously all my clips across the top, and again, those are hook and loop. And on the other side, this is where I've got a zipper pocket, and I've also got things like my threads in there, obviously all my pins, little bits of accessories, again, all zipped in place. But if I was working on another project, maybe I'm using this for multiple crafts, it could be my stamping bits and pieces that I'm putting in here that I want to work on a project, then I can interchange those and make as many of these as I'm liking as I want to. So let's talk about the pattern itself. You've got a couple of ways of getting hold of the pattern, as I say, on the website handmadebyhayley.tv. If you decide to go for the download, then what you'll get is a printout giving you the dimensions of the pieces that you're going to need to cut. And what you'll also find is you will get your instructions that I'm going to be going through now, as well as some ideas, well not ideas, it's the information about the pattern pieces that you're going to be cutting out. What I do suggest you do is maybe make your own paper pattern if you've got some tracing paper, greaseproof paper, pattern paper, whatever you choose to use. Now, if you do want to invest in the pattern itself, it will come in an envelope, again with all the dimensions there, but what you will get is a series of A2 professionally printed sheets, which will have all the pieces on there for you to cut out. There's no photocopying or increasing or decreasing, and you have got a fabulous quality pattern there that's going to be good for quite a few uses. So if you want to go down that route, you can do. Again, you'll be able to find it on the website. So yeah, those are your choices really. So let's get started. So we're going to get started with the removable insert. I'm going to be teaching you how to do the little zip panel that we've got at the top here. I am going to be working from the instructions as we go, so I will be quoting the pattern pieces, which means that if you do want to sew alongside me, you can do. So you'll see from the instructions it tells you that you need to get pattern pieces B and D. Now the one that sits at the top is pattern piece B. So if you're wanting your zipper to sit at a particular point and zip from the left to the right or the right to the left, that's where you need to decide at this stage. So I've got my pattern pieces, I'm going to bring those in ready. And what I've done, pattern piece B is the wider of the two pieces you're using. You're just going to fold it down the middle lengthways, give it a little bit of a press, and that is ready to go. Similarly with pattern piece D, that is the bit that's going to attach to your PVC pocket. So that's folded down the centre, ready to go. And this is where you need to decide if you're wanting your zip to pull to the right, then that is going to be how it's going to sit when you start stitching. I've put some little ends on my zips as well. I will show you those in a separate section, hints and tips, which I'm going to be loading up as well. So of course you can check those out if you want to learn how to do that as well. So all we need to do is get our placket, I think it's a placket. I'm going to get that in place. Now I'm not going to pin it in place because I'm just going to stitch it, and what I'm going to do is just open up my zip a little way and just make sure that the fabric is not too close to the zip, because we don't want it to get caught up in the zip as we're stitching. I've got my zipper foot in place on my machine, so if you have got a zipper foot, brilliant. If you haven't, then your regular sewing foot will be okay, and just nudge the needle over if you can do, to get as close as possible to the edge of your fabric. So lining that up, I'm quite happy with that. I'm just going to take it steady as I sew with this one. Obviously if you're needing to reverse to get those tack stitches in place, you can do, and then all we're going to do is stitch along. Just go gently as you go, and obviously be aware of your zipper pull and move it out of the way if it does get in the way, and just stitch along your zip. Now I'm working with a 12-inch zip at this stage, so of course you can work with a smaller zip. Obviously you need to scale things down if you are looking at doing a smaller version of the bag, but that gets a bit technical, so just be careful as you're doing that. Move the zipper, as you can see, out the way there, drop my foot down and continue to the end of the piece. Working with a jade 35 here, which has got a little scissor cut, so I haven't had to cut that off myself, as you can see there, but there you go. Just make sure that you're happy with that. So there you go, the zip's going to pull nice and easy there. So I just need to do the other side, which I can line up like so. I'm just going to put a pin in the end, because rather than swapping over my zipper foot, it's just going to keep it in place. These aren't monster zips actually that I've got here. In fact, I'm going to go to my hobby bag and get the pin cushion out there, because it's in here. I know exactly where it is. There we go. Pull that out there. It'll be a little bit easier using those. So. And all I'm going to do is pin at the end, just so as it doesn't move. These ends, these raw ends, are going to get caught up in the project as you're stitching. So try and keep them as neat and tidy as you can, but it's not the end of the world if they don't line up perfectly, because as I said, they will get caught up in the zip, the side zips when we start constructing. So again, similarly, lining up the end there, and then put down with this machine before it will let you sew, and then off you go again. If you need to do those anchor stitches, you can do, and then stitch away. If you have got the ability to have your machine stop with the needle down, it's a good idea to have that as well. This means you don't get any jump stitches when you do your little bit of sewing. Move that pin out of the way since we're getting to the end, and then away you go. There we go. So the zip is in place, you can see that it's working very nicely indeed. And so all I'm doing now is take it and press in the underside here, because this is where we're going to be putting the PVC. Top edge is going to attach to the bias binding when we get to that stage, but the bottom part is where I need to attach it to the PVC. So all I'm going to do is fold underneath, so take the raw edge into pretty much where the seam or the stitch line is, should I say, for your zip, underneath like so, and then a little bit of a press. So press that in place like so, give it a nice crisp edge, and then I'm going to do exactly the same for the piece underneath, bringing it in, and what will happen is we'll put the PVC in place and stitch through all of those levels. So just try and make sure that those edges are together, you don't want that back edge to be hanging down in behind the front edge, because when you come to stitch you'll be able to see it. So if anything, just have it tiny step back, so it just gives you a nice neat look. That's if you're particular like I am. So next thing that we need to do is we're going to get our PVC piece. Now your PVC piece is, I think it's E that we're looking at here. Let me just double check. Yeah, it is PC. So you'll have these already cut according to your pattern or your download. And what's going to happen is we're going to take that, and it's a bit tricky because of course PVC is transparent, but I'm taking the raw edge of your PVC right into that seam that you've got where the zip was attached. So take it in as much as you can. Now it's a good point to talk about securing your PVC while you're sewing. If you do want to pin at all, then you need to make sure that you are pinning away from, this is through the whole of the project, do not pin through your PVC. It's not like fabric where your little pinhole will disappear. So if you do want to secure it in place, make sure that it's going to be covered by a piece of fabric. So there, I've pinned through all my levels there, all my layers to keep it in place, but we won't see that. This is something that's important when you are working with PVC. You don't really get any more than 2 attempts at getting a seam right, because what will happen is it will perforate as you're going, and you'll find that you only get a couple of bites of the cherry, so to speak, when you're stitching. So that is all good to go. I'm going to change back to my regular foot and stitch along that raw edge, keeping it all nice and neat as we go, and that's going to secure the PVC. Now when you do come to stitch with PVC, a couple of things that you should know. When your PVC is in contact with your stitch bed, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky for you to actually slide it along. Depends on your machine. Mine's got a metal plate there, so it can be a little bit tricky. Most times I will try and make sure that I'm stitching and there's a piece of fabric behind it. If not, you could use a piece of tissue paper, or even something like stitch and tear stabilizer. But depending on how you work it, and you'll be able to kind of figure it out yourself. So I'm going to stitch along this edge. So again, relatively close to the edge, just making sure that you're going through all of those stitches. Just take your time. As I say, you don't want anything to slip and slide as you're sewing. And then obviously when you come to your pins, do make sure you're moving those out of the way if you have put them in place to start with. And again, just keep it as neat as you can as you go. So there you go. You can see you've got your zip pocket created, well, pocket front, because we need to attach it obviously to the other part, but we need to make the ones that work with your hook and loop next. So that is the next stage. So next we're going to be working on one of the hook and loop pockets. So I've got piece E again being my PVC, and I've got piece F, which is going to be the end band. So what I'm going to do is stitch the two together, and obviously, as I mentioned, be careful with your PVC making contact with the base, so of your stitch plate, in case it's a struggle. So you're looking at roughly a ½ centimetre stitch width when you're working throughout your pattern. So similarly with this here, so I'm just going to take that to the machine. You might need to just give it a little hand to get started, because as I say, PVC is a bit of a funny fabric for some machines to cope with. This one's not doing too badly. And just take it gently and stitch along the edge. Again, if you do feel the need to pin it, then make sure you are going to be pinning within that ½ centimetre seam allowance. Just work your way along, and yeah, just keep an eye on that raw edge. Because of it being PVC, it's not the easiest of materials to keep an eye on, and it can slip and slide a little bit. I think we're not doing too badly with this one, but we will see when we get to the end. Okay, so I've stitched along my ½ centimetre, and then obviously you've got your PVC, so you don't really want to be taking your iron to it. If you do feel the need to press, then just bring in a little extra piece of fabric. But to be honest, the heat from your fingers, doing a little bit of a finger press will be sufficient. Just going to turn that over though, because I need to bring in that raw edge, as you can see there. I've pressed it a little bit, but just give it a proper press, and again keep the iron away from your PVC. So just make sure you're pressing over, again about 1/2 centimetre as you go. And then I'm going to fold it in half, making sure that you can't see it through the PVC like we mentioned before. And then give it another press along that outside edge that we've got there. So give that a little bit of a press, so it's nice and crisp. And then if you do want to pin it to keep it in place, then obviously pin through that edge. I'm going to stitch through and top stitch. I'm just going to hold that in place there as I go. So all I'm going to do is now stitch that in place using a top stitch close to the PVC to encapsulate all that. So I'm going to do that, and I'll be back with you in just a few moments. Okay, so that's all neatly top stitched, so that's my one pocket finished. Now I'm going to do another pocket in a similar way, and this is something that you might want to do with your zip pocket or perhaps your hook and loop pocket, is put a divider in place. And of course the divider, similarly to this particular piece that we've got here, whoopsie-daisy, separates out your pocket. So if you're wanting to put a divider in place, this is how you do it. You have got a divider piece, which if I refer back, I think is, oh, not too sure what it's called, that particular piece, but you'll find it on your instructions anyway. And basically what you do is it's a strip of fabric and you fold in each side. Now you can see I'm actually working on a piece of paper, and I'll explain that to you in just a few moments, but it's a strip that you're folding in 1/2 centimetre on each side, so you've got nice neat edges. Now because this is going under the machine and it's going to sit on top of your PVC, so the PVC is in contact with the stitch plate on your machine. This particular machine isn't very keen on that, so what I've done is just put a piece of paper underneath. It could be a piece of stitch and tear stabiliser. Just be aware, you shouldn't really be stitching too much through paper because it can have a detrimental effect on your needle, but if you're just doing a little bit, then it shouldn't be too much of an issue. And if you're changing your needle regularly anyway, then it won't be an issue. And you can see I've just top stitched just through there the two pieces together. So all I would do then is remove the paper, just literally tearing it away like so, just gently as you go. Tear it away because it's all perforated. So you can tear it on one side and then you would tear it on the other. And you can see it just makes it nice and easy. Obviously if you've got any little bits there that you want to get rid of, then you can do. It just means it's going to pass through your machine and give you a lovely little neat edge. So I need to do the other side of that, and you don't need to watch me doing that. So I'm going to get my paper back in place and stitch along that edge, and I'll be back with you in a moment. So you can see the divider is in place there with the 2 rows of top stitching. Make sure that they're nice and towards the edge, because when we come to stitch the divider in place on the main piece, we will stitch between the 2 of those. You'll also notice as well I've put the band at the top there, so in a similar way that we did it on the pocket without the divider, that is all ready. And of course, just to recap, that is piece F there, and that is piece C that's going down the middle in the front there. So what I need to do now is stitch these 2 together with piece G, and piece G is kind of the bit where you will have your hook and loop tape attaching to that and securing it to the outside of the bag. So again, the edge, just make sure you've got the pocket around the way that you're wanting to see. So if you've got any nice stitching or nasty stitching that you want to hide, this is the point to choose. And all I'm going to do is take that piece G and then pop it to the edge. Now here, if you're wanting to, because it's on the edge, you could use a few clips to keep it in place as you go, which I'm going to do on this occasion. And we will take it to the sewing machine and stitch that, and obviously move the clips out of the way as we get to it. So put those like so. I'll just do this side and then I'll do the other side afterwards. So again, taking it to my machine, what I'm going to do, and what you may well notice is I've put a couple of little pieces of masking tape here. This is a bit of a trial. This is a machine that it isn't my main machine, but it's just a nice little machine to actually show you and I'm doing projects on. So what I've done is I've put a little bit of masking tape, because what I was finding was that the PVC was sticking a little bit, and it's just another little tip there to help you with your masking tape. So we'll see how this machine likes it, and if it doesn't, I will take it off in the next shot. Just make sure that you've got your roughly 1/2 centimetre coming across there, so just nudge that over a little bit there. And then away we go, stitching along the edge together. Take your time again. Oh, my needle's come unthreaded, so let's quickly just thread that up there. Nice and easy. This one's got a nice little needle, easy needle threader, which is a game changer. Once you've got a machine with a needle threader on it, you will not go back to one without. Okay, I'm just going to do a couple of little back stitches there, just because I've come in a little bit further than I anticipated. There we go. Okay, and off we go again. Knock it out of reverse. And take it forward. There, and there we go. Okay, seems to be liking the masking tape there. Again, just take it easy, and then that way, if it does pucker up or anything, you've got the opportunity to either ease it through or stop sewing. Hopefully my arm isn't in the way there. Again, if you do want to use a technique with paper, then you can do that as well. It's whatever works for you, really. Teflon feet are something else you can get hold of as well. So some people will change and put a little Teflon foot on there, because that will go through easier. You can hear it almost sticking to the stitch plate as it goes, the PVC. On the other side, I'm going to do exactly the same. So again, finger press that. Don't get a hot iron involved, because of course what you will find is it will melt and buckle your PVC. So that is in place there. Again, I'm going to come in with the pocket with the divide, like so. And again, I'm going to make sure that this time that the fabric is on the base. You'll just get to know your machine, because different machines behave in a different way when it comes to troublesome fabric, as I like to call them. A little bit tricky sometimes, but it's just finding your way. And there goes my needle threader. The thread out again. I think this machine cuts the thread a little bit too short, so it quite easily pops back out the eye of the needle, but as I say, it's rectified pretty quickly, so you don't have to worry too much about that one. And then off we go again. So put down, and as I say, just easing it through. Take your time. Sometimes you can alleviate a little bit of the foot pressure as well to make it not kind of making as much contact and as much pressure as you go. Just test it with your PVC and your fabric and see how you get on. And again, your stitch length, you might want to open up your stitch length a little bit longer. All personal choice. It's all trial and error. No two machines are the same. Even the same brand machine can vary between owners. So yeah. And then here you go. You can see there you've got that piece in place there. Again, a little bit of finger pressing just to get that down in place. And you've got all your pieces coming together. So what will happen is we'll get the hook and loop in place a little bit later on. Those will be your two pockets. So you've got your big full pocket and you've got your pocket with a divider. But what we need to do is actually attach this to your kind of your lining piece, because at the moment I've done the other piece just to show you. So the piece with my zipper pockets, so those are going to come together. They will actually stitch together in a little while, but of course at the moment you can see right the way through, so we need to put the lining piece in. So I'm just going to grab that and we'll start putting those in place. So I'll be back with you in a second. Okay, so we're going to stitch our pockets, our internal pockets, to the removable piece now. So out of piece A, which is one of your larger pieces that you're going to be cutting out, you'll have two pieces of your lining fabric and you'll have a piece of your, well, I'm using like a foam here. You might be using something like an R form, which you can do, which is for your bags. Wadding, whatever you're wanting. You don't necessarily have to have it with that cushioning. Could be using a stabilizer, a heavyweight stabilizer if you wanted to. It's just personal choice. So I'm going to take away one of those layers for the time being. We'll come back to that in a few moments. And we're going to layer this up. Now I've trimmed it back a little bit. It's entirely up to you. In fact, I've trimmed it back quite a lot, probably too much. But the reason being is when we actually come to do the binding, you might not necessarily want that foam catching in with your seam there. It adds a lot of bulk and it can be a little bit tricky for machines to cope with because you'll have multiple layers there. So trim it back, maybe not be as generous as I've been here, but yeah, it's entirely up to you how you want to trim that. If you are concerned that it's not going to get caught in the seams, then what you could do is actually quilt that piece together. So do a bit of free motion work or do some of your parallel lines, maybe some of your diamonds on there if you wanted to. I'm going to come in now with the pocket that we just created with the divider, because I need to make sure that that divider stitches through all of those layers that we've got there. So you're lining it up, you need to just make sure that you're positioning it so the centre point of your gusset is the centre point of your pieces A. So I'm just going to fold it in half just to find the centre point. You can mark it with a pin, or if you've got one of these heat erasable pens, they are brilliant for things like this. So as close as you can get it. We're not looking for a scientific measurement, but just to help you. So just about where my fingernail is there is pretty much the centre line there. So I'm going to come back in with the pocket, pop that in place, making sure that that's sitting roughly in the centre of the gusset and the centre running parallel there. Now again, if you're pin in the areas where you don't have your PVC. So it's going to go through like so. Again, a couple of pins there. And I'll put a third one over this side to secure it. This area, if you're wanting to, you can actually put a few little little stitches, or should I say a couple of rows across the base there, which I think I'm going to do anyway to secure it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it back over to the machine, which you can stay with me for if you're wanting to. And all I'm going to do is, where we did those parallel lines before, we're going to stitch right down the middle, making sure it's pretty much square, it's squarish, and stitch through all of the layers. So at this stage it's going through that lining fabric that we've got in the pink, it's going to be going through the PVC, it's going to go through that lining, and it's going to go through the wadding or your foam. So you've got quite a lot going through the machine at this stage, so don't go at a rate of knots with it. Just take your time, and as I say, line everything up as you go, so as you're happy with it. Because what you can actually do is, when you come to, if you're looking at this here, it's gone slightly off at the edge there. My divider there probably isn't very straight when I stitched it in place. But if you can skew it up at this point if you want to, you might lose a little bit on your allowance there, but that will get caught up when you do come to use your binding. So you might make your pocket very slightly smaller than the pattern intended, but it's not the end of the world. Again, I'll just take that thread up, and again, it's pulled out the eye of the needle. So let's just quickly thread that up. Oops, take the needle up to the highest point to do that. All these little things that are sent to trace. There you go, pull that through, like so. Get that thread out of the way, drop the needle down, take that to the back there. A couple of little stitches again, just to get you started, maybe a couple of little to go back if you wanted to skewer it. There we go, make sure you knock it back off reverse. And I'm just going to come parallel down the middle of those stitches. Whoops, let's go backwards first. There we go. Down the centre of those stitches there. Bringing it down to that main gusset. And again, just stop where the seam is, where your join is there. Do a couple of little back stitches or your fixed stitch or whatever you're wanting to do there. I should be using my fixed stitch really. Also have it. Taking that reverse off. And pull that out, and then I will show you. I should use the scissors on here. And you'll see there now that that pocket is now attached. So when we come to do the side seams, you can see that your pocket will be intact and it's going through right the way through the wadding. So I'm going to take it back and just top stitch the gusset in place. Just makes it a little bit easier when you're stitching everything together if everything is there and not moving around. So just make sure that your thread doesn't get caught up, and then stitch towards the edge. As I say, with this we will have the hook and loop tape attaching to this in a little while, so it will bring it all together. But just for the time being, we'll just stitch it. It means that when you've got multiple layers, if it's stitched at each of the stages, then it just makes it a little bit easier for you to work with. You don't have to keep putting pins in place and so on. So just going to pop that down, drop the foot down, and away we go. So, has it pulled it out again? Add words with this machine in a moment. Stitch away now, there we go, take it easy, feed it through. You can always hear the machine change when it's got multiple layers to go through. Just stitching past that pin, it is out of the way of the foot though, so it's not too bad. Again here, when we get to that centre point, you can have a lot of fabric there, so again the machine, just go gently, don't go rushing at it. If you've got multiple layers, what you might want to do is open up your stitch length. So rather than working with a 2.5mm stitch, take it up to about 5. Scissors there to stop that. Cut that thread. There we go. And then I'm just going to come down the other side again, flattening it out as you go. And then take the thread through. I don't want it to come out the needle again. Oops, pull it through there. And then go down the outside edge, keeping it all flat as it's going through. You may have also noticed as well, when I'm stitching this, I've actually got the same colour thread on the top as the bottom. Because of certain areas of this you are going to find that you'll be seeing both sides of, and this is one of the situations when I would suggest you have the same thread top and bottom, rather than just going for your white bobbin film. At the end of the day though, if you're making this bag for your own use, then you don't have to worry too much. You can make it the way that you want. So there we go. You can see we've got our pocket in place there when we do the side seams. That's going to keep that in place there. You've got your gusset in place there, and I'm going to flip that over, because what I will do then is come back in with my other pocket that I've created. And again, you can see that we need the lining in place. So we've got your second piece of A is going to line up on top of there, like so. Again, the centre point, you're just going to make sure that your centre point lines up. So the centre point of your gusset that you created with your zip pockets is lining up with the centre point there. And again, just to be on the safe side, I would stitch through all of those just to secure it all in place before you start putting your hook and loop in place. This stage, it's up to you. I can't remember which way around I do it in the pattern. It might be that I tell you to put your hook and loop in at this stage, or it might be after you've done your binding. And you can, if you want to, put your hook and loop in place at the same stage as doing this stitching. But because you've got a lot of fabric there, I would tend to just kind of do a long stitch. I'm going to open the stitch up here to about a 5. I think that's as long as this machine will go. Tack the pieces in place, and then I'm going to come back in with my hook and loop and stitch that in afterwards. That thread's still going through yet. So again, just going straight down the centre line there, curling these in. As I say, depend on your machine, just take your time. You won't see these stitches because of the way that we're working. Got close to that pin, but let's just get that pin out. Don't want to stitch over the top of it. There we go. Curl down. Flat, going. Okay. So you can see there now I've got my zipper pocket and it's stitched in place with my zipper pocket. Down the bottom you've got your second zipper pocket, and on the flip side you will find that you will have your hook and loop pocket on both sides. Don't worry about the raw edges at the moment. As I say, we'll neaten all those up as time goes on. But then I'm just going to go and grab my hook and loop tape and explain to you a few things that you need to know about that. Back in a minute. So next stage is to get your hook and loop tape in place in the centre of your gusset. Now, when you get to, if you do go for the kit, you will find that you'll have a length of hook and loop. And it comes in two parts. You've got one part that kind of feels fluffy, and you've got one part where you feel that kind of grip, little hooks in there. It's quite rough. So when you actually come to do your pockets, your removable insert, should I say, I tend to use the fluffy side. The reason being, the first time that you make your bag, you will use the hook in your bag. But if you're making additional pockets, then you'll be using the fluffy side and you won't need the hooked side. But the hook side is very useful for other projects. So don't throw the hook side away, because that will attach to things like if you've got felt or something like that, you can actually use that on the back of something, and it will kind of hook up to the felt as well. So it's kind of the most useful of the two sides, so use that so as you've got that spare. Otherwise you can end up with an excess of the kind of soft side. So separating this up, you're going to put a piece that's going to run the width of your pocket. So just give it a little cut. You don't have to kind of do a scientific measurement of this. So that's going to run across there, and again, it's up to you which side you want him to put it, really. Are you going to put it on the side of the stitches, the zip pockets, or are you going to put it on the side of the other? It's entirely up to you. But what you are going to do is pop it in place, and then again pin it, and what we will do is stitch around all sides. Now again, at this stage you've got even more fabric that's going through, so just take your time. As I say, most machines will be able to cope with this. Just take your time with it. Open up your stitches, do a longer stitch potentially at this stage as well, and just take your time with it, and you'll be okay, I'm sure. Alternatives, I suppose you could stitch it in by hand, but personally I would rather go slow with my machine and stitch it in place than try doing it by hand. And then just make sure that it's sitting in there. You can see where we did that tacking stitch there, that's sitting in the middle there. So it doesn't have to be too pretty on that side, to be honest, especially if you're using the same thread, because of course you're not going to see that when that's in place. It's kind of being practical, so don't worry too much. So I'm going to go back to my machine, and I'm going to stitch through it again. I'm keeping it on that long stitch, and I'm going to stitch down the 4 sides of the hook and loop. I'm just going to roll this up out of the way again. I've got a lot of fabric. Could be if you want to use something like a quilt clip to keep that out of the way, or a bulldog clip. Just make sure what's passing under the machine is keeping as flat as you possibly can. Just turning that round and securing that in place. Of course, when you're working with your hook and loop and you're taking pockets in and out, this is an area that is going to have a lot of kind of pulling, so just make sure it is really secure. And then just going to cut those threads there. There we go. So you can see it stitched all the way around there. That is intact. On the other side there, it's in place as well. Just got a few loose threads that just need tightening up, but you can see on the whole there, we've got our pocket in place there. So when it comes together, that will be our removable piece, like so. So that will attach with the hook and loop into the bag, and then you'll have your pockets. We're going to put some binding around the edge. We can talk about that now. And yeah, that's kind of the piece coming together. So, right, binding is the next stage. So I'm just going to pop this on one side. And then, yeah, we'll get cracking with binding. See you in a minute. Okay, so we're going to talk about binding. You will need a lot of binding when you are coming to do your bag. I'm going to bring in the piece again, the pocket from before, because the binding finishes off the edges. And that's the key thing. It gives you that neat edge and brings all those raw edges in together. So when it comes to making your binding, you've got a couple of options. You could just go out and buy binding if you wanted to, but I kind of like my binding to match the fabric. So what I've done is I've made my own using the lining fabric that was left over. Now you might not have a long, well, you certainly might have a long enough length to run right the way through everything, so you can make your own binding, and you can make it out of smaller pieces. Now you would tend to have pieces that are longer than this here, but I just wanted to show you how to do a join between your fabrics to make your own binding. And it just makes it nice and easy for when you're working together. You might think to yourself, right, okay, I'm going to stitch the edges together, the ends together, and do it that way. What you will find then is when you're actually folding over your binding, you've got a lot of thread, a lot of fabric there when you're working that particular area, because you're going to have about 2, 3, 6 layers of fabric that you're going to be stitching through, which is a little bit tricky. So what we tend to do in quilting as well is do a mitered edge. And what that involves is taking 2 pieces of fabric the same width, they don't have to be the same length, but the same width, and crossing them over. And if you get into the habit of the one in your left hand, hold that first and then lay the one in your right hand on top, then you'll see how they sit like so. Need them to extend a little bit beyond, so don't be tempted to line up the corner like that, which is something that people naturally think of, but when you get to the next stage you'll understand why you don't do that. And you just literally cross them over like so. Make sure that they are at right angles. What we're going to do is stitch from that little corner, that little nicked in corner there, to the little nicked in corner on the opposite side here. So I'm going to take that to the machine. Just remember to make my stitches a little bit smaller again this time. Go back down to our 2.5, and you're just going to stitch straight the way across the middle. And as I say, it's a nice way of making binding for quilts or placemats, or in this occasion your bag. Put it in reverse there, let's take that reverse off. There we go, and stitch across there. 45-degree angle or just corner to corner, you don't need to know the maths in that. And then we've got our piece there, so let's raise the foot up, take it out. So we've crossed there, you can see how I stitch across the two there. What that means is when we open it up, you will see that you've got a continual run of fabric there with that diagonal seam there. And what that means is when you actually stitch it over, you haven't got as much bulk there, and that is why a mitered join is so useful to do. So just going to cut away the excess there, so just take your scissors, trim that away. When it comes to actually doing pressing your seams, this is where I would open up the seam there and press it like so, because again that's going to sit flatter than putting all those seams to one side. But you can see that gives a nice smooth join there to your fabric, and that's what I did to create my piece that's going to work around my internal pocket, or the removable pocket should I say. What I've also done is I've pressed over one edge. I've got a handy little device that I use, so I'm just going to trim those edges off there and trim that edge off there. And it's a little tool which you will be able to find on my website. It's my little handy square, my little binding square here, and you'll notice there's some little holes in here that will allow you to make your own binding. So to start it off with, I'm just going to, on this occasion, just going to press over about, I don't know, half centimetre I suppose you'd say. Press it over like so, because I just want the pressed edge on one side at this stage. Then I'm going to feed it through, and I'm going to feed it through the one that's actually 1.5 inches. And it just means that when I actually come to press this, it's easy now. It's going to be a bit tricky doing this one on camera, but I'll try and do it. In fact, I'll do it from that. It's kind of back to front now, the way that I'm doing it here. So let me think, which way do we do it? No, it's that way. I'm doing it back to front for the camera, and it's funny doing it that way because it just does not feel right. So I think it's that way around. We'll see how we get on. I'm going to be pressing it away from myself, so we'll see. And just to make sure that it runs through. It's almost like a little buckle that you've got there. A couple of little pins just to hold it in place in my ironing pad that I've got here. Pressing that, should I say. And then, as I say, I'm doing this back to front so as you can see. And then as you feed it through, what you will find is just kind of have it ready with your hand there, and then feeding it through, you move the tool along. You can actually move the tool along and kind of finger press as you go, but what it means is you're tensioning your fabric as you go, and it just makes it easier for you to get an edge. Bear in mind, I am doing this left-handed when I'm right-handed, and doing it in a bit of a funny angle because you usually be doing it horizontal, but you can see that it does help you get a nice crisp edge when you're doing your bias tape. Obviously, if you're wanting to do both edges, then you can feed it through like so, but on this occasion we're just going to do it on the one edge, working our way around. So handy little tool. There's a few little quilting rulers that are coming up, that's all I'm saying at this stage. So they will appear on the website if they're not already there, handmadebyhayley.tv. Okay, so I've got my binding all made. I folded off the one edge, as you can see, and what I've done is I've neatened off the edge of the main panel, as you can see here, the removable insert, and I've just gone around the edge, just done a little bit of a zigzag. Try not to go in too close, too much into the main body of your project. It's just easier if you can actually stitch those layers together. You might just want to do a straight stitch, just makes it a little bit easier as you go. Then you've got your binding. So your binding, where you start and finish is entirely up to you. I tend to do it around where the hook and loop is, because when you actually come to join it, after you've done your complete kind of revolution of it, that's where you're going to do your join, and I don't think you notice it as much when it is by the hook and loop. So you're just going to take some quilt clips and just clip it to the edge. We're going to go down this edge here, and each time you're working about 1/2 centimetre in with your stitch, and then you'll stop about 1/2 centimetre from the end. And again, it's just your regular straight stitch. Then we'll take it to the machine again, get it into position and stitch through all of those layers. And again, take it slow. You've got a lot of fabric going through, especially at this point in the centre there. So just a few slow, even if it's just a hand turn of your machine, just to make sure that you are getting it to exactly where you need it to go. When you're stitching, again, open up your stitch length if you're wanting to. I'm going to nudge my needle over, so I was about 1/2 centimetre in from that raw edge, and then away we go. So again, just a couple of little fixed stitches to get started, and the machine will do that, forward and back, and then we go down the edge there. Again, easing it as you go. Again, you have got some of that PVC making contact with the stitch plate, so if it does feel as if it's struggling, get a piece of paper under there just to help it on its way. It just gives it something to get a bite into. Working our way down the edge there, coming towards the edge, the end here, and when you get to you, pretty much you can eyeball where that 1/2 centimetre is going to be, and then you're just going to stop. Okay, so I've now stitched to, let me just bring that in, sorry, it's about 1/2 centimetre now from where that open edge is there. Obviously you can't see it because it's underneath the tape at the moment, and just about make it out there. So I've stopped with my needle down. If you can do that with your machine, brilliant. If not, just rotate the flywheel and it will bring the needle down to that point. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to rotate the main body of the fabric, so it's at 90 degrees. Because we're going to be stitching down this edge next. But what we need to do is make that mitered corner. So the bias tape that we've got there, we're going to take your index finger and take it underneath there into that little crevice there and push it round, and then bring that raw edge alongside the raw edge that you've got here. So you're not making any stitches here, the needle is still down, so you're not going to have any break in your stitches there, and you can still continue with that foot coming down the right hand edge, as you can see there. And again, hopefully encapsulating all of those stitches. Well, you do need to encapsulate all those stitches as you go. So again, following the edge of the fabric with the edge of your foot coming down. As you can see, take your time. You've got a lot of fabric again there. You might catch the foam as you go. I've got a bit of a mitre there where I made my bias earlier. Come down, and again stop about a quarter, as I say, about 1/2 centimetre again, as you can see there. I'm going to rotate it, lift the foot up again, rotate the fabric round, take your finger in there and move it round like so, and then again come down the raw edge like so. Again, drop the foot down, and then away you go again. Oh. Okay, so what happened then? Well, we broke a needle, that's what happened. And the reason being is, what I should have mentioned was, when you come down this area, don't forget you've got the end of your zip there. And what happened was the needle hit the zip, the metal little prong that you've got there. So do be aware of any of those little obstacles. And I should have mentioned earlier that the zip pull there, I actually moved into the middle, so I didn't catch it on the far side when I was stitching over there, but I forgot about this side over here. So just going to join up those stitches where we left off, and again I'm going to pause when I get to the edge of that zip, and then I'm kind of just going to jump over the area. So again, go gently up until the point of where you can feel that zip is going to be. Okay, and then at that stage you can either move your flywheel. What I would tend to do is move it to the up position, and then just move it through to the opposite side of the zip, and just make sure you're not catching it. Now when you move your flywheel, you'll be able to feel as if you are making any contact with that zip, so just nudge it until you've gone past it, which is what I've done there. and then I can continue with my sewing. I know you'll have a large stitch there when you come to finish it, but it really won't have any effect whatsoever. It's not a main seam or anything like that, so then you can just carry on down the edge as we have been doing. I haven't clipped my fabric to the edge here, but usually you would use something like your quilt clips and then stitch along the edge there, keeping that all together as you go until we get down to the other corner, and then we mite at that corner and keep on going around. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to carry on stitching around the edge, and I will meet up with you in just a few moments. Okay, so I've gone all the way around, done the mitered corners, and you'll notice I've trimmed away the bias tape now. So what I've done is I've stitched all the way around, and where you've got that bias tape, where you've got that loose end there, that's at about 3.5, 4 inches, I've stitched, and I'm about an inch away from where that starts, and I've stopped my stitching. We're going to join those fabrics together in a few moments, but I just wanted to show you the results of doing those corners the way that we did. So here you can see the last one that I've just done there. I'm just going to take away a little bit of the bulk that you've got on the corner there, so just take that away, just makes it a little bit easier. And what will happen is you'll turn that through, and you can see you've got a lovely neat edge there, obviously with the exception of those loose threads that are coming through, just trim those away. So you've got a lovely neat edge there, and what will happen is when we get to the other stage, we will turn it over and we'll do a similar sort of mitered edge like so, and then stitch that in place. It just means that you've got a really nice neat corner. Obviously you've got to press that and get it into position to get it right, but you can see there you've got a nice neat mitered edge when you do come to put your binding on. So that's the way that you can do a lot of your quilt blocks, and or should I say your quilts. Gives you just a nice little neat edge there, as you can see when you are doing your project. So just gives it a professional finish. So that's why that we've done the corners that way. But going back to where you've got your bias here, so what we need to do is join these two loops together, or these two pieces, should I say, the two ends together, and then actually stitch it to the removable insert again. So opening it up like so, again your left hand piece, you've got your right hand piece as well. Now this is where I always get this wrong. So I'm hoping that I get it the right way around this time. And what is a good idea to do, which I very rarely do, which is why I keep getting it wrong, is you bring these together and you kind of play out where they're going to stitch down. So they're going to stitch down about there, that one's going to come there, and so at this point that is where the two fabrics are kind of going to intersect on that raw edge. So then you bring the two together like so, and that's the point where you kind of need to do that mitered edge that we were talking about. So it's around there. What I tend to do is I give myself a little bit of give there as well, not too much. You can always kind of stitch a little bit closer, but you can't, it's a bit tricky to kind of stitch further away if you cut your fabric. So so we're looking at a mitre like we did before. So if I fold that up, you'll be able to see it's similar to how we did the mitre before, and just mimic where your stitches are going to go. So your stitches would go from that little notch in that corner there across, just weaving your pin through like so. And then what will happen is when it stitches, it will come and it will be like that. And you can see there how that piece of fabric then is the right length. So by putting the pin in place, I know that that is kind of the line that I need to stitch on. Yeah, it's come together quite well. It's just the twisting of the fabric. Sometimes if you get that the wrong way around, you'll find that you've got kind of a twist in your bias there. But it has worked well there, and of course because you put the little pin in there, it makes it easier. So just bunch up the lining so you've got yourself a little bit of a work area there. And what I'm going to do is stitch along that little diagonal stitch there. Of course you've got to be careful because you've got a lot of fabric, as I keep saying, and also you've got that pin there as well. So if you wanted, you could move the pin to one side, or just take your needle and just put it down the side of where the pin is, and then kind of ease the pin out as you're sewing. So again, go nice and easy, take your time. I'm going to take that reverse off and make sure I've got a little kind of fixed stitch there. Okay, and then as I go, I'm going to be moving and pulling. I know you can't see an awful lot because my hands are in the way, but I'm going to be stitching and moving that needle out, or that pin should I say, out of the way as I sew, and try not to skew your fabrics as you go as well. As I say, it's kind of a lot of juggling going on at this point, but you do get it and it will work. So there you go, just stitching through there, getting that diagonal stitch, and then hopefully lift that fabric up, cut those threads, and hopefully we'll see how it's come together there. And then obviously once you're happy with the way that that is, that's when you can trim away that excess. But make sure that you're happy. Make sure that when it's stitching in place, you've got a good flat piece that you're going to be stitching together there. Because once you've cut the fabric, that's it. There's no going back. So bunch that up again, trim about 1/2 centimetre like so. Again, if you want to press that open, you can do, but you can see that it's going to sit nice and neatly. So I can then take that to the machine, finish off that seam, and away we go. So let's do that. So take it up to where we finished off without overlap your stitches just a little bit. Again, take your time, don't rush, get it through. And again, there's lots of stitches. You've got your PVC, which you might be battling with as well. Take your time there, just passing that through. And then when you are happy, fix. Whoops, and cut your threads. So there you go. You can go. I'm quite pleased with that. I've got a little bit of a pleat in there, but it's not the end of the world. And then all we're going to do is, as I say, trim off those corners as I just showed you with that first one. And then you're going to wrap your bias around so as that folded edge comes around like so. And then we're going to stitch through all of those to stitch that in place. I just find this gives you a neater edge. Some people will do that, and if you're doing a quilt, that would be the right side of your quilt. And then what they would do is hand stitch the back there. Or alternatively, you can do that on the back of your quilt and then top stitch it on that side, because this would be the right side of your quilt there, so you'd have it nice and neat. And on the side here, if you go a little bit right, it won't matter. So all I'm going to do now is work my way around. As I say, clip that in place if you wanted to as you go, like so, working your way around, and just top stitch that in place. If I've just put a few quilt clips in, you'll get the idea. And actually, I'll do it and then we'll get in close. I'll clip it in place. We'll get up close again with the needle, because I'll show you how you deal with those mitered corners that we set in place earlier on. So I'm going to carry on with this and I'll catch up with you in a minute. Okay, so you can see here I've put my quilt clips in around the edge there. So we come into the corner here. So all you do here, you turn that corner through like so, and you'll carry on the fabric as your bias tape will come down the right hand edge, as you can see there. But we need to neaten up this corner here. So all you do is pretty much just kind of roll it round and create a little kind of pocket there. Put your finger there and you can kind of just even it up so as it's even on one side coming round as it is to the other there. And you'll just neaten it up just as you go. And it kind of gives you a nice little corner. We're not going for prize winning corners here. We're not looking for anything that's going to be any awards. You just want to make sure that it keeps it in place. So again, just come in with a little quilt clip, pop that in place like so. Just makes it a little bit easier as you're working your way around. And then you would just carry on around this edge here, putting your quilt clips in place as you go until you get to the next corner. And then you would do exactly the same. So what we're going to do is stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch now. Just raise my foot up. I've got the same distance. Oh, pull my needle thread out now. The needle is positioned. What I did was I actually went in and had a little look. Personally, the neatest way of doing this is by hand stitching this that we're looking at now. But as I say, it's entirely up to you whether you do want to hand stitch it in place or have a go at using your machine. Potentially quicker. But it's just it might not be perfectly neat. So what I've done is I've set my needle up, so I've made a point of making sure that the edge of the foot is lined up with the edge where the fold is, and the needle is sitting just inside that seam that you've got there that you made when you did your stitching a few moments ago. So it's sitting just a couple of mil in, so that way I know that when I'm stitching on the other side, as long as I'm paying attention to the edge of the foot, I know that it will be stitching inside there and not going into the plastic, because you don't really want it to go into the plastic because it's going to look a little bit messy. That's why it can be a bit tricky. What you could potentially do is stitch it on this side and make sure that you are catching it. As long as you've got a good expanse of fabric on the other side, then you should be able to catch it as you go. So it's up to you which way around you're wanting to do it, to be honest. But I'm going to do it from this side. And as I say, just keep an eye on that raw edge as we go. So off we go, stitching as we go. Again, multiple levels, take your time, no rushing, and then just pass it through there. As you can see, coming down to your quilt clips, you're going to remove those as you get to them. Again, keep going. Again, keeping the folded edge lined up so as it corresponds on the underside. Like so. Then we're coming down to the corner here. Now this is where you'll need to remove your quilt clip, and you kind of just need to manipulate the fabric with your fingers. What you can do is use a pin, or sometimes if you've got like a stiletto that they sometimes refer to in sewing, or maybe you've got something like your seam ripper, just to hold it. You don't really want to get your fingers under the foot there. And if you can get a perfect edge there, what you would normally do is you would have that kind of little 45-degree angle coming in, and the width of your fabric there being the same width as your fabric on this side. But don't beat yourself up too much about it, because as I say, this is a practical project rather something that's going to be decorative. So you stitch down to where you've got that little mitre, that little diagonal seam. Raise the foot up again, rotate it round. You might want to do a couple of little stitches just to get to you, because of course you're going to need to stitch at the same distance from the edge there as we were talking about. So you might want to do just a couple of little stitches just to join it up and get it into the right position. So 1 or 2 little stitches, just like so, or 4 on this occasion. Raise the foot up, and then you'll see that the edge of the foot there again is sitting neatly there. You've got a larger piece of fabric there. I'm not that particular about it, to be honest. I'm more interested in the pockets for storage. I'm not worried about how neat it looks at the edge there. Yeah, again, just drop that foot down and off you go again, working your way down to your next quilt clip. Pull that clip out as you go. Just keep an eye on your bias tape, because it might unravel just as you can see there. And again, just pull that in, make that little point as you go, and then make your little kind of diagonal, tuck it in, tuck it round. You can pin and tuck if you're wanting to. Again, try and keep it in from the edge at the same point so as it's making it neat. And as I said, the neatest way is if you're wanting to do it by hand, but as many of us don't like a lot. We don't mind sewing a button on by hand, but when it comes to putting your bias tape in, you might not necessarily want to go all the way around. So again, coming down the edge there, quilt clips out of the way as you go. Again, keeping from that edge. Same distance, again, multiple layers. Here we're going through your multiple levels. You might even catch a little bit of that hook and loop on the other side. So take your time. Go around. Got a couple more of those corners to do. Again, quilt clips if you're wanting to. Quite often I will sew without quilt clips. Those do as I say, not do as I do situation. Just make sure that you're trying to cover any of those stitches as well that you've used as tacking stitches. But saying that, if you do want to kind of move them out the way at a later stage, you can do. I've left that a little bit tight there, so apologies, my hands are going to be right in the shot there. But again, just going into that corner, catch it, rotate it round, pull it in. And away you go. Some of you out there, if you're a confident sewer, what you might do is figure out a way of actually stitching these pockets right sides together and then turning it through. I just felt this was the simplest way of just adding a little bit of bias tape as you go around. But as I say, that's down to you guys. Every day is a school day, so to speak. So if you do come up with any ideas of different ways to do it, then yeah, let me know. Okay, now the needle there is going to drop down. It has pleated a little bit, so I'm just going to raise the foot up there and just pop that back down where it needs to go. Again, putting your little seam ripper in or a little stiletto tool in there, just catching it again, turning the corner around. We're nearly back to where we started. That'll be the moment of truth then as to how neat that top stitching has been. Work our way down here again. Bulk of fabric, take your time. I know I keep saying it, but it is important. Don't want anybody forcing any fabric through the machines. Be aware of any obstacles on the way, as I say, ends of zips or anything like that, because that's key as well. Work your way down. And with a hope and a prayer, you'll find that those lines, those stitches will join up. You've got fixed stitch at the end there. Cut the threads. And let's have a little look to see the fruits of our labour. Oh, it didn't quite cut right there. So here we go. That's not looking too bad. Yeah, I'm kind of happy with that. It's pretty neat as we go around. And there you go, you can see. So what we'll do is we'll break away and just have a little look at the final result, because the next stage then is to go on and create the bag. Okay, so binding all attached. You can see the finished result there. So I've got my 2 zipper pockets, my large pockets there. Of course, you just decide. It could be that you want to put dividers in there. It could be that you're wanting to put hook and loop on the edges. It's entirely up to you. Then on the other side, we've got obviously your big pocket there, and then you've got your divider pockets there as well. And of course, that's all ready now to go into the main bag with the hook and loop like so. Bringing back in the original one we showed at the beginning, it just shows you how much you can fit into those pockets. So again, 21 fat quarters on both sides there. I've got all my threads there. Obviously some of the tools I took out because I've just been working with them, but then you can see there, that gives you the ability to make your pockets ready for all your goodies to go in there. So all that we need to do next is create the outside bag. So the first stage of making the bag is making the straps, and the straps are made out of pieces of fabric. They're 54 inches by 3.5 inches wide, and you've got your foam that's actually inside there. So this is where I've made it, and I made it as a continual loop, so all the tape has been stitched together, as you can see. The only join that I've got on this particular one, obviously you've got your miters creating your straps, which we spoke of for your outer fabric. But then if I find the end there, you can see how these have been brought together just with a little kind of seam there. It's a flat seam, and it's kind of called a joining edge seam, which I'll explain to you how you can do that, because it's a useful one to know, especially if you've got scraps of foam, of wadding for your quilts, and you want to turn them into a larger piece. It's a nice easy way for you to actually join them together. So rather than doing the traditional right sides together, stitching through and turning out, again, you've got a lot of bulk within there if you are going to be doing that. So what we're going to do is going to butt those edges up together and stitch them together. And the way that you do that is you do it with a zigzag, as simple as a zigzag. Go to your machine, make it potentially as wide as you possibly can, and it can be as long or as wide, it's entirely up to you, but it's just a way of actually joining those two together. So you take them under the foot of your machine, drop the foot down, and you're basically zigzagging. So the needle will go into one half, then the needle will go into the other half, but the zigzag stitch will join the two together. So that's exactly what I'm doing here. So just doing it quickly, going forwards. If you want, reinforce it, go back again, and then that's all that you need to do for the lengths that you've got. Pull your threads out, and there you go. You can see a nice flat seam there. So that's the way that you're going to create that. When you come to doing your straps, again, I've got a shorter piece of fabric here. Cut to the 3.5 inches, and again, I've folded over just about 1/2 centimetre on the edges there, and then you'd fold it in half and then press along that edge. In fact, I'm going to do that because it's kind of not been pressed firmly in place, and it is useful to do it at this particular stage. Now the straps, when you are stitching these, you will find that it is quite a tight fit. If you wanted to, you could trim a little bit off your foam or make your fabric for your straps a little bit wider. It's entirely up to you, but it is manageable. You can do it, but it's just a case of there's a little bit of a knack to it as you're going. So bring your pins in, or your quilt clips, whichever way you're working. And what's going to happen is the edge of your strap is going to go into that fold, and then what you're going to do is you're going to fold one of those edges and wrap it round the foam like so, and then the other edge is going to come to that raw edge there. Now you might find yourself pulling your foam in a little bit like so, but don't worry, because it will actually settle down when you come to stitch it in place. You can see it'll sit quite flatly. So fold it over, put a little quilt clip in place potentially like so, and then just work your way along. So again, the edge of that foam is going to go into the edge of the fold over that you've created. That fold over on this edge, again, bring it up and just line it up edge to edge. Again, quilt clip or pin, whatever your preference is, and then that is just going to work your way. So you would do that for your full length of your strap when you're making it, and then you join the ends together in the same way as I just showed you, where you're joining your foam together to kind of make them maximise the use of your scrap. So you can see working your way along there, and then all you would do is stitch through all of those layers together, yeah, top stitch it in place. So all the way along, you're doing exactly the same as I mentioned there, keeping it in place. And as I say, if you need to, fold your foam in as you go, because when it folds back on itself, it does sit quite neatly like so. And then all you do is you do a top stitch just coming in from the edge there, not a huge amount, you're probably only talking about 1/4 centimetre, if that. And do it on the opposite side as well, so do it on the folded edge, and then that way you've got a nice top stitch. So you've got a top stitch on one side, top stitch on the other, and that is your continual strap that you're going to be using to create your outside of your bag. So once you've got that in place, you're going to use it alongside the outside pieces of your bag. Now, I've got all my pieces here cut out according to my pattern. And you're going to start off with the panel pieces K. Now, this is something that I will mention. Make sure that if you have got a print on your fabric and it's a directional one, make sure that on any of the pieces where there's an arrow, the pattern is going in that direction, so you don't get any nasty surprises with these. So what we're going to do is we're going to lay it out. So you've got pattern piece K, your foam underneath, and you've got your pattern piece sitting on the top like so. So that is going to be your one side of your bag. Then this is going to be kind of the, if you imagine it, it's going to be the other side of your bag, so it's going to come together like so. So again, make sure that the direction of the fabric is going from the bottom to the outside, and on this edge as well, from the bottom to the outside. Now, I'm running out of space here, but you will have another piece of fabric, which is going to be your base, which is going to be the same width, which I think is about 13.5 inches, if I remember rightly. And that is going to sit in there like so. So you just need to make sure that you've got kind of enough space for that. You're going to have a 1/2 centimetre seam again, so bring them in together so you can imagine that 1/2 centimetre seam overlapping. And then we're going to take away that base piece, because what we're going to do is put the straps in place. So the idea being is find the centre point of your strap, and that is going to sit roughly between the two pieces. And again, if you hold it, if you pinch it in place and hold it the full length, then what you will find is you'll find the natural other end for the fold. So again, you might want to just put a pin in place there just as a bit of a marker, so as you know where that is. So that marker that you've created is going to sit roughly halfway between your pieces, and the join that you made is going to sit again roughly halfway through. Now at this point, just make sure that your straps don't twist, because you don't want that to happen. So bring that in. As I say, I'm wrestling with it a little bit here because the foam in there, and you're going to bring it in, and I can't remember how far in I say on the actual pattern now. I'm not too sure, but on mine I'm bringing it in a couple of inches from the outside edge. I think it does say 2 inches. Again, roughly lining that up there, so that's your centre point running through there. And again, just before we pin anything in place, just get that bottom gusset of the bag that's going to come back in, and just make sure that that is positioned roughly in place. The reason I've done it this way is because when we put the pockets in, we don't want the pockets to be obscured with the actual base, and I'll show you what that means in a few moments. Then when you're happy with that positioning, come in with just another couple of pins to position your straps in place. As I say, I'm just doing it quickly. You can take more time if you're doing this and measuring it and making sure that you're happy with the way that they are laying down. But again, just a few little pins there like so, and again on that side over there like so. And again, as I say, just measure, get your tape measure and measure in that distance from the edge there. Now, because that's pinned in place, I'm going to drop that down just so you can see how we're working on the top here. Now, again, you can take another pin. I'm going to take it up to the top here. And again, I think it's a couple of inches from the top there. You're going to put a pin through. And again, on that side there, put a pin through. And what we're going to do is we're going to stitch. Again, you do your measurement for that point there. We're going to be stitching from the base up to the top, across and back down again, and across the bottom there. And you can do that on both sides. I'm going to flip that round as well. And again, a couple of inches from the top, put a pin in place, like so. And again, put a pin in place on that side, like so. And this point is where you can just do any of those checks. So what I tend to do is I bring those pieces back in together like so, just to make sure that my handles are pretty much the same length there at the bottom. And then also that that part there is overlapping and it's pretty much the same at that point as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is take it to my machine and I'm going to stitch down from the pin, which as I say is a couple of inches from the top. Again, just be careful where you're stitching. And what I'm going to do is to try and keep it neat, I'm going to stitch on top of the stitch line of the straps when I made them, so you haven't got too many different sets of stitch lines there. Make sure you go back to your straight stitch if you have still got it on your zigzag from joining, and then just nudge that needle over so as it's sitting on top and follow that down. So I'm going to go down this side here again. Take your time. You've got multiple layers of foam at this stage and multiple layers of fabric. Again, if you come to your pins, move your pins out of the way. Come down to the bottom like so. I'm actually going to stitch across the base and turn that round. So this is going to be within the seam allowance. I've got practically gone to the edge of the fabric at this stage. I'm just going to stitch straight across to the stitch line again, and then straight across or back up to the point where we were looking at the top here. Again, if you've got a heat erasable marker, you might want to just put a little mark there so you know which point to stop. But again, just follow the top stitch of the strap that you've already done, just to keep it neat. I mean, it's not going to have any effect if you don't follow the line, but it's just something that just keeps it a little bit neat and tidy. And you are actually going to have a pocket sitting over the top of this, but if you're anything like me, you will know that it's there. So that's why you want it to be neat. Then when you get back up to the top, what we're going to do is we're going to reinforce each one of these segments that we're doing. So I'm going to do the complete piece of this one, then I'll go on and do the other ones and catch up with you in a few moments. So again, going to stitch right the way across. Okay. Something that you regularly see with bags is then where they kind of do this cross effect. So we're going to go 45 degrees. Again, draw it with a line if you want to with your pen. Okay, to the stitch line. Then come across. Again to the stitch line, and then turn it around again 45 degrees to go back to the starting point. And this just kind of reinforces the back handles at this point. Again, little fixed stitch there, over stitched a bit, but not to worry. And then pull that out, and you'll be able to see there what we've got now is the bag strap attached to the main body going through the foam there, and you've got your reinforcement at the top there. Okay, so that's going to secure it. So all I'm going to do that is the other 3 segments that we've seen there, and I'll catch up with you in a few minutes. Okay, so the straps are in place, as you can see there, going across the middle with the kind of centre point there. And again, this is the point where you can kind of check to make sure that you're happy with everything, because if you want to make any alterations you can. I'm pretty happy with that. A couple of those straps might not be absolutely spot on and straight, but don't worry about it, because we are going to cover up those straps in just a few moments, because of course what we're doing now is we're going to be adding in those pockets. So the pockets on one side, on this particular one, we've got the divide down the middle. On this particular side, you can see there you've got your larger pocket. I'm probably going to make 2 larger pockets, to be honest, on this particular one. So but I will explain how you can put the divide in place if you're wanting to. So move that to one side and come back in with your pocket fabric. Now your pocket fabric, pieces S and T on this occasion. And what you're going to do is take them, I've made one of my pockets already, but take those fabrics and you're going to put them right side together. Now this is again the point where you need to make sure if you've got a directional fabric that you are stitching them together in the right way, because that needs to come and create that kind of pocket band. So what we need to do is make sure that if you positioning it like so, it's a good way of checking that you've got your fabrics right. That's going to stitch together like that, which means that you need it. I mean, because it's a double-sided fabric, you don't need to worry too much about it. But if you bring it round like so, then you know that that is stitching it in the right place to get your fabric in the right position. I'm not going to bother clipping this one with my quilt clips, because it's a relatively easy one for you to stitch together, so you don't have to be hugely particular. Again, ½ centimetre, run it down the edge there, away you go, and not in reverse, take that off there, stitch along the edge. And again, get ready to press it, so open up the seam, nice neat finish, so bring the threads up. And I'll bring that iron in and just press it up like so to give you a nice neat seam, as you can see there. There you go. And then what I'm going to do is take the raw edges of your pocket and line those up like so, and that is pretty much your pocket made. All I'm going to do is press it down to give it a nice crisp fold. Like so. And then a couple of rows of top stitch just to neaten off the edge. So one close to where it joins your pattern fabric and one close to the fold at the top. So bear with me just while I stitch across the bottom here. Ooh, that sounds like a clunky. Oh no, we're okay. And do a similar sort of distance, just so it's kind of symmetrical. Of course, at this stage, if you wanted to, you could be using things like decorative stitches if you wanted to, quite easily. I do like a nice straight top stitch. So I've made my two pockets now, so I've got those ready to go in place. I'm going to bring back in the piece that we've just been working with. And this is where we start positioning them. Now, this is where, if you're wanting to put your divide in place, you choose to do it now. So you're lining up the pocket with the base there, as you can see, so that's running along the bottom there. And all you do is clip that in place, find the point, whether it's a centre pocket that you're wanting to do, or whether you wanted to put a couple of different divides in there. That's entirely up to you. And then just clip that together, just holding it at the sides there, a couple of clips just to make sure it doesn't move from where you needed it to go, like so, and then flipping that one around. And again, if you wanted to, if you want something a little bit firmer with your pockets, you could put a little bit of that foam or that wadding in there. Again, you are adding to the bulk of it though if you do that, so just be mindful of that if you do choose to. And again, just making sure that those raw edges are all lining up nice and neatly, and just holding that in place with a couple of clips. Now the reason that I've done the bag this way is because if I bring the original bag in, what I wanted it to have was a nice neat edge here, so you can see where the some threads hanging there. Take care of those, that's not very good, is it? So where you can see the pocket there is joining the bottom of the bag there, it's kind of going from the fabric right the way through to the fabric again there. If the straps were on the outside, you would see the straps around this point here, and I just think it would be a little bit ugly. So you don't have to, but as I say, I just prefer it this way. So now those are clipped in place, I'm going to bring the base of the bag in that we kind of did the eyeball measurement of. This one, directional, it doesn't really matter, to be honest. But what's going to happen is we're going to sandwich that side and stitch through all of those layers that we've got there. So again, making sure that the right edges and the base all line up nice and neatly on the one side. This, you've got a lot of fabric going underneath your machine at this stage, because you've got your multiple layers of your foam as well as your fabric with your lining and your outer. So definitely put some clips in place, because you don't want anything wiggling or moving. And again, just line it up as best as you can to bring those edges into place. You might need to stretch it out just a little bit to make sure everything comes together, because you've got your, when your clips are clipped to thicker fabrics, you sometimes find that it moves in from the edges there. But as I say, just make sure it all clips together. And then again, the raw edges at the bottom, you need to make sure it catches everything. So again, using your 1/2 centimetre, what we're going to do is stitch along that base edge there. This side we'll go over and do in a few moments, but just going down this edge here. So again, large stitches, potentially because of the thickness of the fabric that you're working with, just makes it a little bit easier on your machine to go through all of those. They're all quite fluid fabrics at this stage. You haven't got any PVC in there, and PVC is the one that's probably the trickiest. So you shouldn't have an issue, but it's just a case of just be aware. As I say, this stage you've got your handles as well as all those layers, so particularly bulky at that point. You can go back and reinforce where those handles come in if you wanted to, but to be honest, because of the way that this has come together, I'm just going to raise that up because the handle caught on the edge of the desk there, so it kind of went a bit skewy whiffy. So let's pull that back down there. So yeah, you can go back and reinforce those areas if you're wanting to, but to be honest, I don't tend to do that because there's a lot of stitches holding it in place anyway. Stitch across there, like so. Again, reverse, reinforce that edge if you're needing to. Cut with your threads. And then at this stage, all you need to do is make sure that when you've stitched through, you've caught all the fabric, so you've not got any raw edges coming through there. So we haven't. You can see there's no raw edges coming through at all there. So I'm happy with that. So all I'm going to do then is flip it over and stitch this particular piece to the other pocket as well. So let's bring that round. This is where you need to just kind of move these pieces out of the way. It's a little bit tricky at this stage because the little straps that are coming through on the underside, they're going to be in the way a little bit, but don't worry too much because you can just kind of stitch through them. You can, if you wanted to, cut them at that point, but I don't tend to because it's kind of defeating the object of putting them in place. So when you're stitching through that point, you are going to have a lot of fabric there again. I know I keep saying a lot of fabric, but it's just to bring it to your attention more than anything really. Sorry, did I take that completely out of shot then so you couldn't see what I was doing? But wafting it around, to say the least. Again, just marrying up those edges as much as you can, easing it into place as you would with any pattern. With my wadding on this one, I do a bit, oh, that's something else to be aware of there. What I've just done is when I've clipped that together, the outside fabric has come out of the seam, so just make sure that you are bringing all those pieces through together when you're stitching. So all those raw edges, clipping it together at the outside, go over to the far side, all those raw edges, clipping it together at the far side there. Oops. Okay, you should hopefully find that if you ease it in, it should all kind of sit together. So yeah, right, so clip in the middle there. And then all we're going to do is stitch through. And then we will actually top stitch those through the base in a little while. Off we go again. Again, you can see you've got the base of your bag there. I didn't quite leave enough room there, so it is a little bit bowing, but some of that will probably lose when we actually come to do a little bit of the pressing. What you can do if you wanted to, if that does really bother you at this stage, rather than unpicking it everything, then you can come back in and kind of cut those straps. To be honest, the weight that you're going to be putting in this bag is going to be held well because of all the stitching that you've got in place there. So what you could do if you are concerned is just cut through there, and that will sit a little bit flatter like so, and then just come over to the other side and pin those straps in place, or stitch it from the underside. To be honest, because you've got the same thread on the top and the bottom, it won't really matter. So just to make sure that those little pieces aren't flapping around, then just literally stitch them into place. Just keep an eye on those straps to catch on everything as you're working, and then just go through, and it just reinforces those. I was just slightly off when I was putting those panels in. So cut those threads. And also this panel that we've got here, when you actually come to put your hook and loop in place, it's going to reinforce those straps as well where they are. So don't worry about your straps coming off, because that's not going to happen. The key thing is, whenever you're sewing anything, if it isn't quite as you first intended, then it's not the end of the world. Everything is fixable. There you go. Okay, so there we go. That's sitting a little bit better now, isn't it? There, haven't got that bowing so much. So you can see there, you've got your pockets in place pretty much when we come to the side seams, and then obviously we've got the inside lining to put in place. What I will do though, and I'm not going to make you sit and watch me do it, is I'm just going to stitch down the outside edge there. Again, it just makes everything sit flatter when we do come to put the lining in place. So I will catch up with you in a few moments. Okay, so there we go, all stitched in place. So you've got your outside of your bag coming together like so, but then of course we need to work on the inside of it, which is what we're going to do next. And what you will do is you'll follow the instructions, similar sort of way to how we worked on the removable pocket, whereby you're going to be making your pockets to go on the inside of the case. You'll see that the gusset segment is wider on this occasion, and you've got your lining fabric that's going to go on the back of this. Now there's no foam to go on this piece, because of course you've got the foam on the outside of the bag, so you don't need to add that to this. So all you're going to do with this is line up the edge where the zip is. That's going to go right the way up to the top there. So again, clip it, put a couple of pins in there to keep it in place just temporarily, like so. So that goes in place like that. And then run it flat. You will notice that when you actually work with your lining, that you'll have a little bit left over where you've got your other pocket that's going to go into your case there. That's kind of like the one that is just your open pocket that you've got there. And it's the reason being is you need obviously the opening for you to get in there. At this stage, if you want it to have a wider opening at the top there from when it actually makes contact with the binding, it all stitches together, then you can make this segment a little bit smaller. But all you need to do is make sure that that width there of the gusset there doesn't fall any smaller than the bag gusset that you've got on the outside, as you can see there. So what we're going to do is we're going to clip that together. So again, pinning through the fabric, not pinning through the PVC. So bringing that up like so, and clipping that in place like so there as well. And then what you can do is just put it wrong sides together, like so, and like so on that far side, lining up the outside edges roughly as well, so that lining is going to fit the outside of the case, as you can see there, like that. Then all I'm going to do is take some of the hook and loop tape, so make sure that that segment is sitting central there. Take some of the hook and loop tape that you've got left over from when you were doing the spine on your removable, and we just need to put about 3 pieces across, and if you feel, you'll be able to feel where the outside seams are, so you need it to sit within those outside seams there. So you should have enough there to cut roughly 3 pieces the same width, so just kind of fold it, put it into 3, and then position them there. What I tend to do is I position them where the straps aren't, so you can see the straps are there, so I put one to the side of the strap there, one to just the size of the strap that side, and then one that's sitting in the middle like so. Then pin those in place like that. One there, and one, the last one. And then basically you're just stitching in the same way as you did on the removable panel. You're just going to stitch around to make sure that they are good and solid in place. If you want, you can do it twice, because obviously when you're pulling your insert in and out, it is going to be tugging on that area there. So yeah, if you're wanting to do that, by all means, you please do so. I'm not going to stitch around them now. I'm going to come back to that at a late stage, because what I want to do is show you about the next stage, which is the zip. So I'm going to stitch around that, and then we'll come back and work on the zip. Next part that we're going to work on is this wide part, the side part that wraps around the bag. So it's going to go from the base that we've just created around the edge and right the way around to the other edge. So the first stage is to start getting that zip in place. So you've got your piece, which I think is piece U, if I remember rightly, and you've got your pattern fabric. Again, kind of think about which way you want in that fabric to sit, and kind of have your directional going up, ideally with this one. And you've got your large zip. If you've gone for the kit, then you'll have your zip included. This is a zip that I've had to have manufactured because I couldn't get hold of them. Basically, the large zips with the double sliders tend to be a much heavier zip, and they tend to just come in your black, your navy, your white, your cream, those kind of colours. And I wanted something to match my fabric. So on my website, handmadebyhayley.tv, we've got a pack of zips, so all the zips that you need for your hobby bag, including this double slider one, and we've got them in this kind of salmon pink, and we've also got them in the navy blue. At some stage we will be bringing in additional colours as well, but we just started off with those because they were the kits that we did on Hajanda. So all you need to do to start off with is get your zip in place. Now you will find that your zip is a little bit longer than the bag piece, the side piece. It was just because I wanted to make sure that you've got enough room to kind of stitch that in place. So all you're going to do is make sure that you're stitching it along the one long edge like so, and you're going to encapsulate it with the right side. So you're going to stitch it to the right side. So lay down your right side, take your zip, take the metal bit just outside because we've got enough on this to allow you to do so, and then you're going to put your lining place in your lining fabric in place like so, and clip it. Okay, and again you're going to work your way along the full length of that, and it's a good old length that you're working with. So put a few clips in to make sure that nothing moves around. And we'll stitch it all in place in a few moments. So we'll need to get the zipper foot back on, and then just straight stitch along. Also make sure that the right side of the zip is facing the right side of your patterned fabric. You don't want it to be facing your lining fabric. So it's a good point to check this, but as I always say, clip it in place, and then we'll just have a little look. We'll imagine that we've put those stitches in, and just make sure that we have got it sitting exactly as we need it to do. So again, if you're at home, take your time to do this. As you can see, the zip is plenty big enough, and I haven't bothered doing the kind of ends of the zip like we did last time, because I knew the way that this comes together, you don't necessarily need that really, because it's going to get lost within the casing. So keep it right the way to the end, like so. And look nicely, so that's all there. So imagine that you stitched, and you're just making sure that you're going to have the zip sitting on the top of the fabric, and of course this is going to, this outside edge is going to attach to the outside of your case. So swap the foot over again. I'm going to do it with my zipper foot. There we go, to the side. Swap that over. And again, make sure that you're not going too close to those teeth. Just close enough. Nudge the needle over if you're wanting to. Use just your common sense as to not going too far. That's probably about it. And then when you're stitching it in place, just keep, make sure you've got all your raw edges together as you're sewing, and just keep the edge of that zipper foot running along the edge of that zip to make sure that it is sitting exactly where you're wanting that neat edge of stitches to go. Again, a couple of little fixed stitches or a few little reverse stitches as you go. Whoops, there we go. This back and then come forward and then stitch along that edge. Steady Eddie as always. At some point you are going to come to where the zippers are. So you can see that big lump in my fabric there, so that's where we've got to. So just move those sliders out the way. If you can move them both at the same time, just so you're doing it at a later stage again. And then raw edges lined up, and off we go. Again, now at this stage we've not got the foam involved because I just feel it's easier to do it. The one that I did, I actually put the foam in at the stage as well. Just find it a little bit bulky, so leaving that out at this stage. We will stitch it in place in a few moments though. Edges lined up. When working with zips, I often like to use a zip that's a little bit big, because you can always make it smaller, but you can't make it longer. Like so. There we go, and then what we do is press that in place, but open it up, and you will be able to see that it's sitting just where you need it to go. And then something else, I'll just come along and do a little top stitch just to make that sit nicely. So bring in the iron, careful not to burn the fingers. Press that down as you need to. Both sides, make sure that it comes across and you're not catching that thread, because it's quite easy when you've got multiple layers for the fabric to bounce back to where the zip sliders are going to be and catch. So yeah, do it from both sides to make sure it sits nice and flat. And also be careful with a hot iron on your zip, because of course elements of your zip are plastic and you don't want to melt them with a hot iron. Done that a few times before, and I'm just going to stand up and do this little bit because it's a bit tricky to get there. When you iron along, rub it down, so it's well away from those teeth there. So, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in with my foam and then top stitch that in place. So the foam, according to the pattern, you'll see that you just need to trim it a little bit narrower than the foam the pieces that we've just been working with. And then again, in a similar sort of fashion, it's going to come right the way up to where that seam is, and you can see it's going to sit nice nicely there. And again, it's not going to go right up to the edge at the base there, which means that when you do come to stitch it in place, it'll just be nice and neat when you're stitching the one to the other. On this one, I haven't trimmed it down enough, so I'm going to trim off a little bit before I stitch it in place there. Just makes it a little bit less bulky, because this is going to actually stitch to the main case. So if you haven't got that foam there, just taking probably about 1/2 centimetre off again. This is one of those things that when you position it, that's when you know the exact amount, because obviously when you're sewing, sometimes there can be a little bit of a deviance with your seams and things like that. So just trimming that raw edge off there, and then all I'm going to do is top stitch through all of the layers there, and then that will sit nice and neat, ready for us to attach to the main bag, which is what we will do next. So I've top stitched along the line there. You can see double edge there, should I say double stitch line there. I've also got the foam in place there, and what I have done is I've kind of just stitched along the raw edge there, just very roughly. I haven't caught it everywhere, but it's not the end of the world. It's just to make life a little bit easier when we come to attach that to the main body of the bag, which is what we're going to be doing now. So I'm just going to move my machine over just to give it a little bit more room as I explain to you what the next stage is. So we're going to stitch, you can see here the bag, obviously the main body of the bag. Again, what I've done now is I've stitched the hook and loop in place. As you can see, I've got a little bit of a tail end there, so just trim that away. And I've done this according to the instructions. You will see that you just need to put your 3 strips across horizontally. The reason you do it horizontally is because your internal pocket that you created a little bit earlier on will attach. So you've got your hook and loop there, it will attach like so, and the fact that you've got quite a broad piece there means that you could potentially put 2 or maybe even 3 dependent on what you're keeping within there. So you've got plenty of room for those to fit in there like so. So they just roughly be stitched in. Something else I've also done is you need to have a row of stitches going across there, otherwise this pocket has not got an end to it, and you'll find that elements could go into the gusset there if you've got anything small within these pockets. So you just do a little bit of what we call stitch in the ditch. So where you stitched your base in place, you just run a row of stitches along that seam there, or groove should I say, and again along the groove there. So you're stitching in the ditch there, so where your 2 fabrics come together, you're stitching down the middle. And then yeah, it's up to you how much time you take. I'm not too particular about it, so you can see here it's not entirely straight on the inside there, but obviously you can take your time when you're working with that. So putting the side piece in, this is going to be the bit that sits around the edge like so. So what we need to do is stitch it right sides together. So I'm going to flip that over to start with, and we're going to start from the lower side of that gusset that you created earlier on, and it's going to be a case of it's right sides together. So again, when you're stitching this, just kind of look at what you're doing. So the outside of your bag is going to have a nice neat edge when you come to stitch it, and on the inside you're going to have the raw edges when all those pieces come together, and that's the bit that you're going to use some of that binding to go around there and neaten up the edge. So at the end of this piece here, I'm going to take into the corner there and overhang it just very slightly, because what will happen is that end piece will get caught up when we stitch the base like so. But following the directions, we're going to go down the left hand side. This point is where you decide which part you want to be kind of like your opening, your top, because this is going to be the bottom of your bag. So if you've got a particular pocket here, a divider that you want to be on the top of your bag, then you need to decide at this point and rotate this round accordingly, but it doesn't make a huge amount of difference, to be honest. So I'm going to use quilt clips because I don't want to risk piercing any of the vinyl that we've got in there, or the PVC. So quilt clips around the edge, and all we're going to do is do each of the straight sides individually. Not going to take it and do the whole thing together. It's quite a lot, quite a mammoth task to do just in one stitch around. So you can see here I've got some raw edges. I'm going to clip those together like so, coming right to the corner over here. So just make sure you use plenty of clips to keep it in place. So it's going right the way through to the corner. Then if I move that over, you'll see we'll stitch that in place, and then next stage will be to stitch around this side. But of course, when we come to stitch around that side, you need to make sure the handles are out the way, because you don't want to stitch those into your seam. So you can see how it's coming together. So So let's get that stitched in place to start with. Now, as I keep repeatedly saying, you've got a lot of fabric that you are stitching through here. So take your time. And if you're wanting to stitch from this side through to the other side, you can do. It's just whatever's most convenient for you. I'm going to go in this direction. And I will actually take it out of my machine when I come to turn the corner. So I'm going to bring it up. Again, similar sort of 1/2 centimetre seam width with this one. You might need to go a little bit further in because you have got quite a lot of fabric there, but it won't make a huge amount of difference to the overall size of the bag. So we're going to go from the stitch line that you created there, because we know that that stitch line is where those two parts of the bag meet on the other side. So pop it under the foot, and I'm just going to stitch with the edge of my foot being the main part on the selvage of the fabric, and I've just got my needle sitting in the middle of the swing. I've not altered that at all. Long stitch because we've got a lot of fabric that we're going through, so I'm just going to open that stitch up, and I don't know why, for some reason it isn't, oh it is now, it wasn't allowing me to actually open up that stitch, so I'm going to stitch it at about a 4 mil stitch. Take your time, little steps, and then each time you get to one of those quilt clips, you're going to move that out of the way. So I'm going to bring my foot pedal a bit closer as well. So I'm just going to do a couple of little stitches, and then I'm going to do a stitch back. I've actually got a denim needle in at the moment, which is a bit of a tougher needle. So obviously when you're working with denim, you would use a denim needle. Because I've got so many layers of fabric, it's a bit of a chunkier needle to go through. So here I've got multiple layers of fabric, I've got multiple layers of vinyl, and of course the foam or the wadding as well. So there is a lot going under that needle at this stage, but this machine's not doing too badly with it, as you can see. So stitching along. Again, keep an eye on that zip. Don't want any nasty accidents when you get to there. And if you do get to your zip and you are concerned about going over it, then just stop and kind of jump across. Here I think we're okay. I might just turn the flywheel as I go, because if there's any resistance there I can stop. So you can see, yeah, we're gone across okay there. Now you can see where I've stitched along there, just in from that outside edge. So I'm going to carry on down. You've got about, as I say, a little over 1/2 inch between the edge of the fabric and your needle. So I'm going to carry on, so as I've got a similar sort of distance from the edge of the fabric in, so it's almost like a little square in the corner there. I'm going to go into the top corner. So if I draw kind of roughly where I'm going to go to, and it's going to be, if I lift it up, hopefully you'll be able to see it there, where you've got that little square there. So I'm going to go into that point of that corner there and then turn. So carry on. Apologies that you can't get right in close and see exactly where I am stitching, but that's just the nature of the way that a sewing machine is set up. So you can see I'm going to stop there, and then I'm just going to do a couple of little stitches going backwards, because we actually need to rotate the fabric now. And just by putting a few little stitches in reverse, it just means that I've secured that fabric. So I'm going to raise the foot up and pull that out, and I can show you a little bit better what I've done at this stage. You can see now where I've stitched down to that point, which is the corner there. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to come in with my little stalk scissors and snip into where those stitches are, just as there. I think you'll be able to see that there. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and stitch, snip should I say, because what I need to do is actually move that fabric, and having that snip there means that I can open it up a little bit. In fact, I'm going to make it into a little triangle, just to give it a little bit more space to manoeuvre. Don't go too far in, because all we're taking away really is the bulk of the fabric there. So you can see how I've nicked out almost like a little triangle there, because what I need to do is take this fabric now along that edge, clip it in place, and stitch in a similar sort of manner. That's where I snipped into the corner there, and you can see I've come along with my quilt clips and clipped that raw edge in place along there. So that's all clipped, ready to go. So I'm going to take it to my machine and pick up where that stitch stopped off on that corner, and repeat the same thing that I did in that corner at this corner to stitch that final edge in. So I'm just going to bring it up to my machine. Just make sure at this stage that none of that fabric there is caught up, because you don't want any nasty kind of pleats there. So make sure as it's passing under the machine and you're stitching there, everything is neat and flat. Yeah, away you go again. So dropping the needle down again, little tentative steps. I think the needle's come unthreaded there, so I'm just going to thread that up very quickly. Tentative steps, as I keep saying, that is the key thing. Different machines behave in different manners when you're going through multiple layers and you've got the bulk there. So just be mindful of how your machine operates and how it works. And then, yeah, as I say, if you're cautious, just do a few little stitches with the flywheel rather than pressing on your foot pedal. I'm going to move that clip out of the way because it's quite close to where we're stitching. And do a couple of little reverse stitches there just to make sure that corner is intact, and then off we go again along the edge. So again, using the edge of the foot on the edge of the fabric, and because I've stitched all those levels together with the little zigzag stitch that we've got there, what that means is it's making it a little bit easier because you've got multiple layers there. So stitching them together means that they're kind of all working together to go under the foot rather than wrestling with it. And again, a couple of little reverse stitches at the back there, a couple of threads. And I'm going to do exactly the same as I did. Snip it on the corner there and cut it and stitch it round, and all being well, and I think it's looking pretty good at the moment, that raw edge that you've got there should marry up with that seam. So now you can see I've stitched around all three sides of that top or base, should I say, on this occasion there. So stitch through all of those. This stage, just flip it over and make sure that you haven't got any gaps in your seams there, which means that you've caught everything. And if you turn it inside out, you can start to get a feel for how your bag is going to be looking, because you can see there you've stitched that base. So how it's going to work is you're going to have your base there, see how it's coming together, it's looking more like a bag, and of course we need to stitch up the sides there now to make it into the base, and then we'll attach the zip to the lid. And you can see there how it's all coming together. So it's looking good, isn't it? So I'm going to pin and clip that in place. We'll do that in a second. I'll show you that. Now I've clipped along the edge here. So we've stitched up until this point here. I'm going to pick up the stitches. So my needle needs to go into the point where the last stitch is. And we're going to stitch along this raw edge here. And what I have done is I've made sure that the zip, the teeth of the zip, are now lining up with that seam there between the gusset and the lid. So just make sure that that is in place like so. I'm going to stitch, and what I'm also going to do is stitch over where the zip is there. You can see I've already put a few stitches there just as a marker, and what that will mean is that at that stage we can actually trim the zip back, and you can also see we're well out of the way of that metal clip, so we're not going to be breaking any needles. So I'm taking it under the machine again, just manipulate it so as it goes into the point where that last stitch was formed. And then obviously do a couple of little back stitches just to secure that in place before you start stitching forward. And again, keeping the foot on the edge of the selvage edge, and come up the side to pretty much the halfway point of the zip. And in fact, I'm just going to go past the teeth. So as we're securing that in place, again, you're going through plastic at this stage because it's the teeth, and then just go backwards and forwards a few stitches just to mean that when you actually do come to cut the zip, it is going to be secure and it's not going to mean the pulley comes off the end or the slider comes off the end. So I'll pull that out. I can, now that I've done my stitches there, I can just trim away the excess of that zip without any issue at all. That can go in the bin, don't need that. You can see now, oh, this is exciting bit because it really does start looking like a bag. Turning it through like so. You can see it's a little bit unsightly inside because we're going to neaten and bind all those raw edges that you've got inside after we've stitched the zip in place. But you can see there it's coming together a treat. So we just need to stitch the zip now around the outside parameter in a similar way as we've done the zip previously, and then you can see your bag will be coming together. So the way we do that is turn it inside out again, make sure that the handles are tucked well out of the way because you don't want to catch that on the zip. Move my machine over it just a little bit. Oh, I can trim away the excess of the zip on the other side. I didn't do that, so let's just get rid of that. You don't need that either. Make sure that those handles are in. Also, give yourself a little bit of an opening. Make sure that the zip is open. Well, we can kind of get your hands in there and do that afterwards, so don't worry too much. We'll be sliding those zips around as we go. Start at whichever point you like, one of the sides, and you're going to do it similar as you did with your zip before. You can see it neatly sits on that corner, so come in with your quilt clips, line up the raw edge of your zip, and again, because you've stitched these layers together, I haven't managed to catch it all the way around, but it's not the end of the world. You can clip those and it just makes it a little easier. So if you've got an overlocker, that's quite useful because you can overlock those edges. And it just brings everything together. But try and bring those raw edges together, because when you're stitching through all of those, you don't want to have to go back and stitch a second time because you didn't catch them. Again, we're going to stitch in a similar sort of way as before. All we need to do is make sure that everything is working and you're not going to twist your bag. So kind of find your centre point of your zip, work your way back and manipulate your fabrics around the corners, because you might find that if you're rounding off your corner, you have to come in just a little bit there. Use a little bit of kind of crafter's license to make sure that it fits, because otherwise what you might find is that corner there ends up skewing. So if I start using that point for the corner of my fabric, you can see that it's going to kind of go a little bit awry. But you might find that you've kind of gone off a little bit in the process because there's been a lot of sewing and a lot of manipulating the fabric. So I'm just going to clip that to there. You can clip it all in place and do it in one run if you're wanting to, but I just tend to think it's a little bit easier if you do it in the three sides like we did with the base. So bringing it down to around there, and I'm going to clip that just to ease it around the corner. So keep it within the edge of the fabric, don't go too far in, just make sure it's going to be within the selvage. Come up to that point there, and I'm going to sit that around, bringing that point to the back there. I'm going to sit it around there and then just ease the rest of the fabric in around it. And if it does mean easing in, might mean that you have to go a little bit further back with those seams. So just take a few minutes just to kind of manipulate it and make sure that you're happy with the way that it's sitting. Yeah, I'm happy with that now. Yeah, just nudge that across there. So it's quite generous on this one side of the zip. The fabric's tighter on the other, but I think when we actually get to the corner and then turn and go around, it'll sit quite nicely. So I'm going to stitch along here, and then what I will do is I'll stop, pick up in the same way as we did with the corner, clip my zip in place along that long edge, and again clip it again, come back in with quilt clips and do that last bit. So I'm going to just stitch around all of three pieces there. You won't see an awful lot on the machine, to be honest, if we do it live. So I'm going to stitch that and then I'll meet up with you in just a few moments. Oops, what I should have said is don't forget to put your zipper foot on. So there we go. One finished bag. Well, nearly finished. It's not quite finished because of course at this stage we've done the zip, so the zip is going to come around. Just make sure that that zip is running freely, and obviously if not, then this is your opportunity to make sure and take out the zip wherever you need to. You will have a lot, oh, that's caught on there. You will have some raw edges here, quite a lot of raw edges that will need neatening off. But you can see basically you've got your bag there with your pockets and obviously your internal pockets there. Of course, your little wallet that you created earlier is going to sit in there very, very neatly, like so. Ready for you to put all your crafty goodies in there. But what you do need to do is neaten that edge, that raw edge on the inside. So what you do is turn it inside out, and this is where you're going to come back with your binding tape and kind of cover up those raw edges. Good point to start somewhere where you're not going to see your join. So this is kind of the base. When that's turned inside out, it's the base, so you're not really going to notice it there. So this is where you've got a couple of choices. You can come in with your binding tape like we did before, clip it in place and then stitch around that raw edge. It's going to be quite tricky to do that. You're going to have to go quite slowly doing that. And then of course what you can do is wrap that around, and then I would at that stage hand stitch that folded edge in place because you've got much more control with that. Other way that you can bind it if you're wanting to, which is a much slower process, but to be honest it's quite a neat process, is make your bias tape with both edges folded in like so. You can press it again if you're wanting to obviously finger press it or press it with your iron to give you your tape like so. And then what that will do is wrap around, and then you can hand stitch that. You can either slip stitch it on one side and then go back and slip stitch it on the other side. It's up to you how you want to do it. It's just a case of it's a neater finish if you're doing it by hand. If you are going to go around the edge with this, just take your time, as I say, take your time, work your way around, and then clip it in place all the way around, and then come back in. And I would say once you stitch it, do bring it round, and then, as I say, hand stitch it at that point. You'll get a much neater finish. It's going to be one of those things that if you do rush it and try and kind of stitch this side in again with your sewing machine, it's going to be very, very tough to get a perfect finish. So that's my suggestion. And yeah, then your bag is pretty much all done. So there you go, there's your finished hobby bag. I've stitched my bias tape in place. I did one side by the machine stitching, and then I turned the other edge in and finished it off with my hand stitching, so you can see the nice neat edge. So that's the machine stitch side, and on the outside that is the hand stitch side. And I hope you've enjoyed the tutorial. I hope it's helped you create your own hobby bag, first of many, you never know. And of course, if you do want to invest in the pattern now, it is available on a Handmade by Hayley.tv website, and it's available as a download, or you can get hold of the paper pattern if you prefer. So there you go. Good luck with your hobby bag. See you soon.